let me ask you this.
Yeah.
What if we were murderers?
Yeah.
Would we be denied access to a church? I hope not.
That's the people that need to be there.
That sort of behavior, to me, is indication of trying to dumb down the letter, to make the letter writer, this offender, look dumber than perhaps he actually is.
This was not about your daughter, JonBenet. This was about you. Somebody who's either very angry at you or very jealous of you. And I said, I can't imagine I made anybody that angry. It's not my nature. He said, well, you may not even know him. And that was somewhat comforting. But our company was in Boulder, Colorado, which is not a big town. And, we were kind of a big fish in a small pond.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. What is the 3-page ransom note meant to achieve? What is the motive? Whoever wrote the note, what is the motive behind the ransom note? We talk about staging, we talk about smoke and mirrors, we talk about misdirection, but do we ever talk about the thing that we're not supposed to be looking at? So if the ransom note was a very serious effort to distract, and I believe it was, what was it supposed to distract us from? And more pertinently, did it succeed?
That's how it is with people. Nobody cares how it works as long as it works.
I have no idea what the ransom note writer was trying to achieve. Really, I mean, there could be a host of things they didn't want you to look or think about.
There is so much in this world that I do not understand.
What I do know is the least talked about aspect of the Ramsey case is something referenced in the second line of the ransom note. Anyone know what that is? Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button and let's get started. I'm not talking about John's business being Access Graphics. Oh no, I'm talking about a much bigger corporation, Lockheed Martin. Is there any chance that the ransom note had something to do with Lockheed Martin? Think about the references to foreign faction and respecting your business but not the country that it serves. Lockheed Martin's a defense contractor. Now, many people assume that John Ramsey's business was Access Graphics. Aren't you one of them? And beyond a few cursory mentions of Access celebrating a turnover of $1 billion a week before the incident, and also Boulder's Chamber of Commerce naming John Ramsey as their Entrepreneur of the Year in 1995, a year before the incident, that tends to be the sum total of the narrative about John's business. Isn't it time that we spoke a little bit more about it, seeing as though the ransom note writer, whoever he or she was, seems to have that at the top of their mind? To repeat, it's strange that we don't talk about John's business because it's at the top of the mind of the ransom note writer to the extent that it's at the top of the first page of the ransom note. Bear in mind the ransom note is also addressed to John. So let's take a closer look at John's business, in particular the media narrative, thin and threadbare as it was following the incident. So there's this article from December 31st, 1996, the Denver Post, Details Emerge in Slaying. One of the earliest articles in the JonBenet Ramsey archive is this one from the Denver Post. Ramsey also had been temporarily replaced as president of Access Graphics, a subsidiary of Lockheed Martin Corp. Now, what that tells you is that as early as about a week after the incident, Lockheed had replaced John Ramsey. How many of you out there knew this, that Access Graphics is a subsidiary or was of Lockheed Martin? You know, Lockheed Martin is America's largest defense contractor, by far. And yet the ransom note expressly refers to John's business before adding this cryptic remark: "We respect your business, but not the country that it serves." Could it be that the ransom note had an ancillary purpose to address John's employer? Think about the fact that it's addressed only to John and then mentions his business in the next 2 lines. John's business technically is America's largest defense contractor, and here you have a perpetrator claiming to be a small foreign faction. Part of the job of Lockheed Martin is to defend national interests against aggressive enemy foreign factions. Now, it makes total sense in terms of the ransom note that John would imagine someone at work wanted to score a point against John. This was some sort of attempt to get back at John. And in the very first minutes after Linda Arndt arrived at the scene, this was exactly what John told her, that his suspect, the suspect that he had in mind, was someone that worked at Access. John has also often repeated what ex-FBI profiler John Douglas once said, that someone close to him, probably associated with his work, was very angry with him. And you heard something like that in the clip from CrimeCon at the beginning of this video. Now, all of that makes sense within the ruse of the ransom note. But then what that's suggesting is someone else, not John, is involved in this crime. But if the ransom note is a misdirection, or a misdirection within a misdirection, I mean, it has to be if it goes on for 3 pages. What are we being misdirected away from? Again, I've no idea, but let's get back to the Denver Post article. Quote, Lockheed said it has named Gary Mann, a Lockheed executive in the company's Orlando, Florida office, as acting president for the Boulder Computer Distribution Company. Not to put too fine a point on it, but after JonBenet's death, John is replaced by Lockheed Martin and by someone from Lockheed Martin, not someone from Access Graphics. This is because, surprise, surprise, John actually works for and was employed by Lockheed Martin. The article continues, Access Graphics Vice President Lori Wagner said that Boulder executives are running the company, but Mann from Lockheed Martin is available if needed. Mr. Mann is John's boss at Lockheed Martin. Let me just repeat that. John's boss is employed by Lockheed Martin. The executive team has all the operational bases covered, but Lockheed Martin has chosen to appoint an acting president. Lockheed Martin spokesman Evan McCullum said that Ramsey was temporarily replaced so the company did not have to bother him about business matters as he grieved. This is a terrible time. His daughter has just died, McCullum said. Now, what I think is not mentioned there is, of course, at this point, it wasn't clear whether the Ramseys were implicated, were guilty, were going to be arrested or indicted or charged in terms of this case. It wasn't clear if that was going to be the case or not. And so you can imagine that the company also needed to be careful to be associated with someone who could could cause reputational damage to the company. I don't think they are mentioning that here, but I do think that they're not thinking about it. So I definitely think if you read between the lines, it's hard to imagine that that wasn't on the cards. And so you can get a very real sense that John wants to keep his job. And how is he going to keep his job? Now, although it's easy to assume that Ramsey left the company, he actually resumed his position, his work, his duties within weeks. And of course, it helped that they weren't indicted within those weeks. They weren't arrested within those weeks. They weren't even questioned within those weeks. On April 9th, the Denver Post reported that John was back at work. John Ramsey went back to work at Access Graphics this week as Boulder detectives returned to Atlanta, continuing the investigation into the mysterious murder of the 6-year-old daughter, JonBenet. Ramsey is working part-time now, but will return to a full-time schedule at the computer distribution company by May, said Access Graphics Vice President Lori Wagner. Now, even though he returns, he works part-time. You can see his status at Access Graphics hasn't been fully reinstated. Do you think if the case had proceeded in a normal way, at a normal pace, a lot more quickly than the 3-year unsettled, undecided, unresolved, unmitigated mess that it became. In other words, if the Ramseys had been arrested and charged and indicted, do you think John would have been able or allowed to return to work? Also, if there was no ransom note, do you think the case against the Ramseys would have proceeded faster? Because the first thing that happened was the investigators investigated the case as a kidnapping. If the ransom note was meant to distract but also delay the discovery of what really happened, didn't it, for all intents and purposes, succeed?
I have absolutely no idea how it works, but I do understand the reason for it to work.
There's a lot more to say about this whole Lockheed Martin situation, but I'm not going to take it further than that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.